She had always been a hardworking woman, someone who turned life's challenges into opportunities. Growing up in an orphanage, she had learned to depend on herself. Through sheer determination, she built a small but thriving food business in the bustling city of Lagos. The business gave her a sense of purpose, and the kind notes she left with every meal helped her customers feel seen and appreciated. It was in this small restaurant where Chi's story truly began. Jida, on the other hand, came from a world vastly different from Chi's. He was the only son of the wealthy Obi family, whose name was synonymous with power, influence, and endless privilege. Raised in luxury, Jida had always felt trapped by the expectations of his mother, Karo. She was the driving force behind everything in his life, meticulously planning his every move, even down to the woman he was supposed to marry. Karo had already chosen a bride for him, a wealthy, well-connected woman who came from a family just as prestigious as theirs. For Karo, love had little to do with marriage. It was all about power and reputation. Jida's life was suffocating. Every day was filled with business meetings, high society events, and endless reminders from his mother about what was expected of him. But when Jida's personal assistant started ordering meals from a small restaurant near his office, something changed. The food was delicious, but what truly caught Jida's attention were the handwritten notes that came with each order. These weren't just business-like messages, each one was personal, filled with encouragement and warmth. They made Jida feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, human. Intrigued, Jida decided to visit the restaurant in person. That's when he met Chi. She was nothing like the women Jida was used to. She wasn't interested in his money or his family name. She was simple, grounded, and had an energy that instantly drew him in. For the first time, Jida felt free from the expectations that had always weighed him down. In Chi, he found a sense of peace he had never known. As their relationship blossomed, Jida kept his family name a secret. He didn't want Chi to see him as Jida Obi, the heir to a fortune, but as Jida, the man who cared about her. They spent time together, laughing and talking about their dreams, and Jida found himself falling deeply in love. She was different from anyone he had ever known. Her kindness, resilience, and humble outlook on life were qualities he admired. She wasn't part of his world, and that's exactly why he loved her. But Jida knew the day would come when he'd have to introduce Chi to his family. He dreaded it, knowing that his mother's obsession with status and wealth would be a problem. Still, he believed that their love could overcome any obstacle. He had to believe that. Chi, on the other hand, was optimistic. She knew Jida came from a wealthy family, but she didn't fully grasp how big the gap between their worlds was. She thought love would be enough. When Jida finally told her the truth about his family, she was nervous but hopeful. She believed in their relationship, and trusted that Jida's family would accept her if they saw how much she loved him. The day came for Chi to meet Jida's family. As they drove to the Obi mansion, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had never been around such wealth before, and the grandeur of the Obi estate was overwhelming. Still, she tried to focus on the positive, reminding herself that Jida loved her, and that was all that mattered. When they arrived, Jida introduced Chi to his parents. His father, Chief Obi, greeted her politely, but it was clear that the true power in the family lay with Karo. From the moment Karo laid eyes on Chi, the tension was palpable. Karo's smile was tight, her eyes cold. She didn't see Chi as a person, she saw her as a threat, someone who didn't belong in their world. As they sat down for dinner, Karo wasted no time in making her feelings known. She began asking pointed questions, disguised as casual conversation, but it was clear she was testing Chi. Where did she come from? What kind of education did she have? What did her family do? Each question felt like a trap, designed to expose Chi's background and prove that she was unworthy. She answered as best as she could, but she could feel Karo's judgment in every word. By the time dinner was over, Chi was exhausted, her nerves frayed. She had tried so hard to make a good impression, but it was clear that Karo had already made up her mind. Jida could see the pain in Chi's eyes. He knew what his mother was doing, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time in his life, Jida stood up to his mother. He told Karo that he loved Chi, and nothing she said would change that. He made it clear that he intended to marry Chi, whether Karo approved or not. His words sent a shockwave through the room. Karo was furious. She had spent years molding Jida into the perfect heir, and now this woman, this nobody, was threatening to ruin everything. Karo didn't raise her voice, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. She told Jida that he was making a mistake, that she was only after his money, and that this relationship would destroy their family's reputation. But Jida didn't back down. For the first time, he chose his own happiness over his mother's approval. He loved Chi, and he was ready to fight for her. After that night, the rift between Jida and Karo grew deeper. Chief Obi remained neutral, too passive to challenge his wife's authority, but Karo was relentless. She was determined to end Jida's relationship with Chi, no matter the cost. Despite the growing tension, Jida and Chi's love continued to flourish. But they both knew that Karo wasn't finished. The battle for their future had only just begun. Jida knew his decision to stand by Chi would come with consequences, but he hadn't anticipated how far his mother would go. Karo, furious after the dinner where Jida defended Chi, refused to accept the situation. She had always controlled every aspect of her son's life, and the idea that he would marry someone from a lower social class infuriated her. Karo wasn't just disappointed, she saw Chi as a direct threat to the prestige and legacy of the Obi family. From the very beginning, Karo had made it clear to Jida that his marriage was not just about love, it was a transaction, a partnership between powerful families to strengthen alliances. For her, marrying into another wealthy and influential family was the only acceptable outcome for her son. Chi, in Karo's eyes, was nothing more than an opportunist. She viewed her son's love for Chi as nothing more than infatuation, a mistake that needed to be corrected. And she wasn't about to let Jida's mistake ruin the family name. Determined to break them apart, Karo began her next move. She quietly started planting seeds of doubt in Chief Obi's mind, telling him that she was only after Jida's wealth. She painted Chi as manipulative, claiming that she was using Jida to climb the social ladder. Chief Obi, who had always trusted Karo's judgment, began to listen. He didn't have the same intense feelings as Karo, but he had been married to her long enough to know that once she set her mind on something, she wouldn't let it go easily. But Jida was unwavering. Every time his mother brought up the topic of Chi, he made it clear that his decision was final. He loved Chi, and he wasn't going to let anyone interfere. This only made Karo more determined. She couldn't stand the idea of losing control over her son, and she couldn't let the Obi family be associated with someone she deemed beneath them. Karo wasn't just concerned about Chi's lack of wealth. To her, Chi represented everything that wasn't supposed to happen in their world. She didn't come from money, she didn't have the right connections, and in Karo's mind, she wasn't polished enough to represent the Obi family. Karo saw Chi's humility as weakness, her kindness as manipulation. In her eyes, a woman like Chi could never belong in their circle, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make sure of that. Karo started manipulating situations to put pressure on Jida. She'd host lavish family events, inviting wealthy families with eligible daughters, hoping that Jida would meet someone else and forget about Chi. She even arranged for him to reconnect with Lara, the wealthy woman she had originally chosen for him. Lara was everything Karo wanted in a daughter-in-law, beautiful, educated, and from a powerful family that could strengthen the Obi's social standing. Lara played her role perfectly, doing everything she could to win Jida over. But Jida wasn't interested. His heart belonged to Chi, and no amount of pressure from his mother would change that. Karo, however, refused to give up. She was relentless in her pursuit to make sure Jida married someone of her choosing. And when her subtle attempts failed, she decided to take more drastic measures. Karo arranged a meeting with Chi, hoping to intimidate her into leaving Jida. She invited Chi to the Obi mansion under the guise of having a private conversation about Jida's future. When Chi arrived, she was met with a cold, unwelcoming atmosphere. Karo didn't mince words. She made it clear that she wasn't welcome in their family. She belittled Chi's background, her business, and even questioned her intentions with Jida. Karo made it painfully obvious that she believed she was only after their money and that she wasn't fit to marry into a family like the Obis. She, despite feeling hurt, stood her ground. She told Karo that her love for Jida had nothing to do with his wealth or family name. She explained that they had built something special, something based on love and mutual respect. But Karo wasn't interested in hearing it. To her, it didn't matter how much she loved Jida. The only thing that mattered was protecting the family's reputation. The conversation ended with Karo giving Chi an ultimatum: leave Jida willingly, or she would make sure Chi's life became unbearable. Karo threatened to ruin Chi's business, promising that she would use her influence to destroy everything Chi had worked for if she didn't step away from Jida. Chi left the mansion shaken. She hadn't expected the level of hostility from Karo, and now she was faced with a difficult decision. She loved Jida deeply, but the weight of his family's disapproval was starting to take its toll. She didn't want to be the reason Jida was constantly at odds with his mother, and she certainly didn't want to see her business, the only thing she had built for herself, destroyed. Jida noticed the change in Chi after her meeting with Karo. She became more distant, hesitant, and unsure about their future. She didn't tell Jida about Karo's threats, not wanting to put more pressure on him. But Jida knew something was wrong. He could sense the weight of his mother's disapproval bearing down on Chi, and it infuriated him. He hated that his mother was trying to control his life, and he hated even more that Chi was caught in the middle of it. Despite everything, Jida remained firm in his love for Chi. He reassured her constantly, telling her that nothing would come between them. But she couldn't shake the fear that Karo would follow through on her threats. She didn't want to be the reason Jida's relationship with his family was destroyed, and she didn't know how long she could endure Karo's manipulations. Karo, sensing that her ultimatum hadn't worked, decided to escalate her efforts. She wasn't about to let her son marry Chi, and she was willing to do whatever it took to stop the wedding from happening. In Karo's mind, the stakes were too high. She couldn't allow a woman like Chi to become a part of the Obi family. It wasn't just about Jida's happiness, it was about preserving the legacy she had spent her life building. The tension continued to build, and Jida found himself torn between his love for Chi and the toxic control his mother had over his life. He knew that the longer this went on, the harder it would be to protect Chi from Karo's schemes. And as the pressure mounted, it became clear that something had to give. Karo's relentless pressure on Jida, and she wasn't yielding the results she had hoped for. Her manipulations only seemed to push Jida closer to Chi, deepening their bond in defiance of her wishes. This infuriated Karo, and she realized that if subtle tactics weren't going to work, she would have to resort to more extreme measures. She couldn't stand the thought of losing control over Jida, and the idea of him marrying Chi was simply intolerable to her. Determined to break them apart once and for all, Karo devised a cruel plan, one that would leave lasting scars on both Jida and Chi. When she discovered she was pregnant, it should have been a moment of joy for the couple. Jida was thrilled at the news, and for a brief time, they both imagined a future where they could finally be a family, despite Karo's opposition. But Karo saw the pregnancy as an opportunity to execute her most devious plot. She knew that this was her last chance to ensure that Chi was removed from Jida's life permanently. On the day of Chi's delivery, Karo took control of the situation. Using her influence over the hospital staff, she arranged for the baby to be taken away immediately after birth. When she woke up, exhausted from labor, she was met with devastating news: her baby had died during childbirth. The doctor, paid off by Karo, delivered the news with false sympathy, and Chi's world collapsed around her. She had lost her child and the life she had dreamed of building with Jida. But the truth was far more horrifying. The baby had not died. Karo had secretly sent the child away to be raised by a distant relative, ensuring that she would never know the truth. She believed that by taking away Chi's child, she would destroy any hope the couple had of building a future together. It was a monstrous act, but Karo convinced herself it was necessary to protect her family's legacy. Meanwhile, Karo told Jida a completely different story. She fabricated a tale of how Chi had abandoned their child. According to Karo's version, Chi couldn't handle the responsibility of being a mother, and had left both Jida and the baby without so much as a word. Jida, heartbroken and confused, couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Chi he knew wasn't capable of such an act, but Karo's lies were so convincing, and in his vulnerable state, he believed them. Jida's grief over losing both his child and Chi consumed him. He couldn't understand why the woman he loved would abandon him in such a heartless way, but Karo's manipulation had worked. He was left questioning everything. As the months passed, Jida withdrew into himself, pouring all his energy into work, trying to forget the life he had once envisioned. Chi, on the other hand, was left to grapple with her own grief. Believing her child had died, she retreated into her small world, her heart shattered. Chi's recovery was slow and painful. Every day was a reminder of what she had lost, and the betrayal she felt from Jida's silence was unbearable. He had disappeared from her life completely, and she could only assume that he had moved on. She didn't know the depth of Karo's involvement, or the lies Jida had been fed. All she knew was that the man she loved hadn't been there for her when she needed him most. She focused on rebuilding her business, trying to find solace in the work that had once brought her joy. But even as she moved forward, the pain of losing her child and the love she thought she had lingered. As for Jida, his life became a hollow shell of what it once was. He tried to convince himself that Chi's abandonment was proof that their relationship was never meant to be, but the reality was that he couldn't move on. No matter how much time passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He hadn't been able to let go of the love he had for Chi, and despite his mother's attempts to introduce him to other women, no one could fill the void she had left behind. The weight of the loss bore down on him, and he found himself constantly thinking about what might have been. Years went by, and the truth remained hidden. Karo believed her plan had succeeded, but she couldn't foresee how fragile her victory truly was. Her son was distant, emotionally detached, and increasingly disillusioned with the life she had orchestrated for him. The pride she once took in controlling his future began to feel hollow, but her stubbornness prevented her from admitting the damage she had caused. Everything changed one day when Jida's personal assistant ordered food from a new restaurant that had recently become popular in the city. When the meal arrived at Jida's office, it came with a small, handwritten note, a simple message wishing him well. The handwriting immediately struck him as familiar. It was a style he hadn't seen in years, but it was unmistakable. It was Chi's. Jida's heart raced as he stared at the note, memories flooding back. He hadn't realized how much he had missed those small tokens of affection, and now, seeing her handwriting again, he felt the first stirrings of hope. He had to know if it was really her. After all these years, he needed answers. He couldn't continue living in the shadow of the past without confronting what had happened. Driven by this newfound determination, Jida visited the restaurant. When he arrived, it was as though time stood still. There, behind the counter, was Chi. She looked different, stronger, more self-assured, but she was still the woman he had fallen in love with. Jida felt a mix of emotions, relief, guilt, and overwhelming sadness for everything that had been lost between them. He knew now that he had been wrong, that he had allowed his mother to manipulate him into believing the worst about Chi. Chi, too, was taken aback by the sight of Jida after all these years. But the moment she saw him, she knew this encounter would dredge up old wounds she had spent years trying to heal. She wasn't ready for what he might have to say, and part of her didn't want to hear it. But she couldn't deny the unresolved feelings between them. Jida didn't waste any time. He told Chi the truth about what his mother had done, explaining how Karo had lied to both of them, how she had convinced him that she had abandoned their child. Chi's shock was palpable. The betrayal she had suspected for so long now had a face, Karo's. As the truth unfolded, it was clear that both of them had been victims of Karo's ruthless need for control. The revelation of Karo's deception left them both reeling. They had been robbed of the life they could have had together, all because of one woman's obsession with power and status. But now, with the truth out in the open, they were left to decide what came next. Jida could hardly believe the full scope of what had happened. The years of heartache, the anger he had carried toward Chi, all of it based on lies orchestrated by his mother. Karo's manipulation had stolen the life they should have had together, and now he faced the reality of what that meant. But there was something even more important than the betrayal: their child. Jida told Chi the truth: her baby had not died. Their child was alive, hidden away by Karo in a twisted effort to keep them apart. It was a devastating realization, and she struggled to process the depth of the cruelty. Chi's emotions were a storm of confusion, grief, and disbelief. The pain she had carried for years thinking she had lost her child, compounded by the betrayal of Jida and his family, was almost too much to bear. She had spent so much time trying to rebuild her life, trying to heal, and now the past was rushing back to her in the most painful way imaginable. Yet, despite everything, the knowledge that her child was alive gave her a flicker of hope, a glimmer of something that might make all the suffering worthwhile. Jida was determined to make things right. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he vowed to do everything in his power to reunite Chi with their child and repair the damage his mother had caused. He immediately started the process of finding their child, who had been living with distant relatives under Karo's supervision. Jida's guilt was overwhelming. He had trusted his mother and let her lies destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. But he also knew that wallowing in that guilt wouldn't fix anything. He needed to act, to prove to Chi that he was serious about making amends. Finding the child wasn't easy, but Jida was relentless. He uncovered the web of deceit his mother had spun, realizing how deep her control had gone. She had hidden the child away in such a way that it would be nearly impossible for Chi to ever find her. But Jida's persistence paid off. After weeks of searching, he finally located their daughter. She was living a quiet, simple life, far removed from the chaos that had engulfed her parents' relationship. The reunion between Chi and her daughter was an emotional one. Chi had never imagined this moment would come. She had resigned herself to a life of grief and loss. But now, standing in front of her child, she was filled with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She embraced her daughter, tears streaming down her face, as the years of pain began to lift, if only slightly. This was the child she had lost, the child she had grieved for, and now she had a chance to be her mother again. It was overwhelming, but also healing. For Jida, watching Chi with their daughter was both beautiful and heartbreaking. He saw the love and tenderness between them, and knew that it was something he had missed out on because of his mother's selfish actions. He also realized how much he had wronged Chi by believing the lies. But there was also a sense of relief. He had helped bring them back together, and now there was a chance to build a future. Chi, however, wasn't ready to simply forgive and forget. The years of betrayal and heartbreak couldn't be erased just because the truth had come out. She appreciated Jida's efforts to reunite her with their daughter, but she needed time to process everything. The pain of what had been done to her couldn't be undone with a single act of redemption. Jida understood this, and he didn't push her. He gave her the space she needed, knowing that their relationship, if it were to be rebuilt, would take time and patience. Meanwhile, Karo's world was crumbling. Jida had cut ties with her, furious over the lies and manipulation she had used to control his life. She had spent years building an empire around her family's reputation, but now that empire was falling apart. She had lost her son, her granddaughter, and the respect of her husband, Chief Obi, who had finally come to see just how destructive Karo's need for control had been. Karo tried to justify her actions, claiming that everything she had done was for the good of the family, but no one was listening anymore. Her reign over the Obi family had ended. Jida wasn't interested in seeking revenge against his mother. He didn't have the energy for that. His focus was on Chi and their daughter, on rebuilding the life they had been robbed of. Slowly, he and Chi began to reconnect. They spent time together as a family, allowing their daughter to get to know both her parents for the first time. It was a process of healing, not just for Chi and Jida, but for their daughter as well, who had grown up not knowing the truth of her own family. Over time, she began to soften toward Jida. She saw the genuine remorse in his actions, his dedication to making things right, and his love for their child. They talked more openly than they ever had before, sharing their fears, their hopes, and the pain they had both endured. It wasn't an easy road, but slowly, they began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Jida made it clear that he wanted to be with Chi, not just for their daughter, but because he still loved her deeply. He knew that winning her back would take time, but he was willing to wait. Chi, for her part, began to see that Jida's love was real. It hadn't been destroyed by his mother's lies, and even though they had lost so much time, there was still a future for them if they were both willing to work for it. In the end, it wasn't just the reunion with their daughter that healed the wounds, it was the slow process of rebuilding their relationship, of choosing to trust each other again. Chi's resilience had carried her through the darkest moments of her life, and now, with Jida by her side, she felt stronger than ever. As for Karo, she was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. Jida and Chi didn't seek to punish her, they simply moved on without her, choosing to focus on their future rather than dwell on the past. Karo's attempts to regain her son's favor were ignored. She had done too much damage, and now she had to live with the choices she had made. Chi and Jida, together with their daughter, finally began to build the family they had dreamed of. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would never fully fade, but they had a second chance. And this time, they were determined to make the most of it.